4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Art of Move podcast. We are on everyone's favorite number, episode 69, with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We're still out here in the Canadian Rockies trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics. Really stoked to have another solo episode with Will. It's been far too long. And today we're kind of kicking off a series on a particular theme that we want to start exploring. And that is almost a philosophical inquiry to how we discover information as it pertains to movement and just as it pertains to information in general. We're going to investigate the scientific method. We're going to investigate anecdote on a further level. This is basically almost a series expansion on our episode 14 that we did a while ago, but in a much more in-depth context, in more specific context to movement as it pertains to the entire field, not just our particular niche fields of just biomechanics. And Will, that's sort of my summary and understanding. If you want to give people kind of a baseline of some of the research you've been doing and some of the ideas that you've been playing with and kind of outline where some of the discussion is going to go, I think that'd be a good place to start today.
Well, there's so much to this, right? And at first it was just kind of, I've noticed that people were coming at this niche, right? Like the alternative biomechanics niche where, we're trying to figure things out by actually moving and, talking to each other and having discussions, right? And especially on this show, we're trying to bring everyone together and see where the good ideas and not so good ideas are. Take what's useful, disregard the rest, right? But now I think we're kind of butting heads with who I know now to be the research-based, there's chiropractors, physios, sports med doctors in there, and it's basically research based versus movement based, like what we do, right? So in the world of research based, this is your clinicians, again, chiros, doctors, physios, that's where they lay, but not all of them lay there, right? There's only a certain subset that are really research based, and what that means is they've agreed to make the research, like the scientific research, a peer review study to be what the truth is. Okay. So in order to have a discussion with them, you have to have that premise. And if you don't have that premise, then you're not in the discussion. Right. So, and of course, our field or our niche here, right? Because my field is actually chiropractic, right? And I come from a research-based thought process. That's what's funny about the whole thing. But I digress. Back to this. It's almost no research base, and research being, official research. It's, people figuring things out, observing, talking, doing is a big one, right? Actually doing the movements. And so it really comes down to different thought process. What is evidence? What is evidence to you? What is truth to you? Who holds the authority to the public? What is truth? Who should the public trust when they talk to somebody? These are all different questions that come within this paradigm, but there's different aspects of it too. Again, there's the public, how the public looks at science or how it looks at the field of movement and biomechanics and pain and all that. And then there's the clinician end of it. Again, chiros, physios, medical doctors, osteopaths, naturopaths, whatever, right? And how they look at things, how they're seeing the public and how they're seeing the conversations. And then there's the, more the personal trainer aspect of it, which is who we've dealt with this whole time, right? Mm-hmm. This is pretty much uncredentialed in terms of, medical authority. They don't have doctor behind their name. They don't have any, they're not physios. It's just somebody who did a certification and has come upon information. Now, when you look at it from a research-based lens, you're like, I'm going to throw that out, right? So you can't enter the conversation because you never started coming into the conversation, right? Because the conversation is the research-based paradigm, okay? So I'm here to challenge that research-based paradigm, that's not the only thing in the world, okay? It is a valuable aspect of it. And again, we have to like separate what that is. And that's what this show is going to be about.
Yeah.
Is really getting granular.
Because this is I just want to pause and say that we're not trying to create a false dichotomy between people who read research and people who don't read research. We're talking about the idea of research-based and evidence-based as a particular mindset and making yourself closed off to further inquiry from other sources of information, where Will and I mean, you subscribe to a research review. I don't subscribe to a research review, but I'm regularly reading research about topics that interest me and that pertain to questions that I have about movement, biomechanics, fitness, etc. But rather than just say, well, this study said this and therefore it's the truth, I kind of look at it as part of one of the overall arching narrative that ties in with other factors like my experience, like the experience of others, like the results that people get, like the bizarre circumstances that you run into as a personal trainer. While I'm not a personal trainer, I ask trainers who are, experiencing, hey, if you have a client with this, what are things that have worked, what are things that haven't, and looking at it as a part of the overall dynamic truth, right? Because the truth is not a static thing necessarily. Even within science, you see a lot of evidence-based physios, clinicians, etc., who are debating amongst each other, interpreting what the studies are suggesting and interpreting what the studies are saying. And so we're not creating a dichotomy between people who read research and inform their practice on research and people who don't read research and say research is dumb. We're just saying that the mentality of being evidence-based and discarding other forms of information. It's basically, I think we used the term scientism at one point, which is the idea that the only valid information that you can gain about reality is through the natural sciences, which, whilst the scientific method is an extremely reliable way to sort out information, it's always hyper contextual. And when we're studying something that has as many variables as the human body and dynamic movement, the scientific method is, you brought this up in a conversation that we had earlier, is very good at narrowing variables down and testing narrow variables for specific things. And so we're going to talk about the philosophy of scientific inquiry a little bit more. And I just wanted to point that out, is that we still read science, and we're not trying to at any point invalidate the utility of the scientific method, of research, of any of these things, but we have to kind of look at it for the reality of what it is, which is a part of the puzzle, not the objective truth and the first principle of truth.
Well, I wouldn't invalidate the scientific method. The scientific method is beautiful. I would invalidate research studies that are only looking at variables that don't actually find anything. These aren't the variables we need. The methods are wrong. Okay. Like, you're not testing the things that you should be testing. This is what I'm seeing all over the place. And it is worse than I thought now that I'm looking into it. Right. So I haven't really been looking at papers very specifically. I'm going to tell you my story a little bit, right? I haven't been looking at papers very specifically because I did for so long, and it didn't bring any fruit, because there's someone agreeing here, someone disagreeing here. You enter one camp of thought, and let's just say right now it's that biomechanics doesn't matter when you're lifting, okay? That you can flex your spine, it's fine, right? And then you're going to find another set of guys that are like, no, you can't flex your spine while you lift. And then there's guys that are like, oh, there's nuance. These are all research-based guys, and they're saying the exact opposite things. They're very, very different ways of looking at the research, or they're picking the research that they want. That happens quite a bit as well, right? So the area that we're in, or the niche that we're in, the biomechanics, the Weck methods, GOTAs, functional patterns, ATG, like all those practices that aren't evidence-based, in that mainstream scientific based evidence is informing what they do. That's not how that operates, right? They may be working on scientific principles, okay? So like a functional patterns, now that I look at it back, the Naughty episode, and I take a look at that and I go back to my evidence-based mind, they would look at that and just scratch their heads at every point, because almost everything he said about, 10,000 things that can't be verified by science, but it also can't be falsified. And when they do try to falsify it, it's going to come up short, right? So what is actual evidence base? What is going on here? What is the nuance of it? And that's what we're going to come into, right? So there's never even been a consensus of whether we should prove or disprove a hypothesis, like it's literally at that point. And evidence-based science is very new. People think it has been there forever. We're talking, some people say the 70s, some people say 1990s is when it started. Nobody told me that when I was in school. They're just like, this is how it's done. And you're like, okay, that's how it's done. So basically, when you're in school, I'm in, second, third years, everyone's starting to really research, really use evidence. And you have clinicians ahead of you who are, they seem like they know everything. Okay. You're just like, this guy can pull any paper out of his head and he knows the date. He knows who did it. He knows the paper that attaches to that paper and the context of it. And you're like, this guy's a genius. Right. So that would be someone like a no bullshit physio, or like an Adam Meekins or a Greg Lehman is a great example. Okay. These guys know papers like the back of their hand. Okay. It's mesmerizing and stuff like that. But a lot of the papers that they pull are opinion. And in order to disprove, basically they're not disproving anything with them. Okay. And they're arguing amongst each other in a major way, not the ones I mentioned, but the camps are arguing amongst each other in a major way as to how are you drawing conclusions that what the biomechanics, the alternative biomechanics field is doing is incorrect, and you can disprove it when you can't even come to a consensus yourself. Okay. And the methods are terrible when I start looking at them too.
Well,
so,
that's
we'll
the
get
thing,
into
right?
that.
Where I think the issue is, especially if you have a systematic review, you have to go in and you have to look at the methods section of all the studies that actually met the criteria of a systematic review, if you're going to look at it to prove or disprove a certain hypothesis, right? And that this is something that we did with specific papers that were trying to disprove aspects of functional fitness, whether it was GOTA, whether it was functional patterns. You and I spent a good couple of hours just like together looking at the research that was cited by different influencers who were saying functional fitness is bullshit because here's this paper, here's this systematic review, here's this prospective study, here's this da 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 da. And we actually look at it and it's like, okay, well, the issue here is because they're so wrapped up, I think, this is my own perception, because they're so wrapped up in the surface level marketing of what these functional fitness systems are saying superficially, right? Superficially. And they're not actually looking at the nuances of what the functional fitness systems are suggesting that you do. They're not looking at the actual solutions and the methods of the functional fitness systems. They aren't looking at studies that would test the variables that are relevant to disprove the hypothesis of why you would do a functional fitness thing, for example.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it, right? Like, basically, they haven't really looked at it at all, because why would you look at it? It's outside the science. It's woo-woo land, right? Like, you need to be research based in order to, like, the research based evidence is the best evidence, period, in that world. Okay. And they're like, you're crazy if you think otherwise, right? So to have a conversation there, you have to come with evidence. And if you don't have the latest paper memorized, why are you even in this conversation, right? So it's a different world and different paradigm. That's the whole thing. Speaking a different language, movement, and a lot of it is mechanics. Like, when I actually go into practice, because I the funny thing is I consider myself research based, right? Like, I read more research probably than most clinicians. Okay. Most clinicians don't read a lot of research because it's hard and it takes a lot of time. And you have to know where to go. So, by the way, I recommend Research Review Service, Dr. Sean Thistle, amazing stuff. Okay. So that gives me like a cheat sheet towards what's at least what the field is. Okay. What the whole aspect of the research is saying. Okay. And again, there's hundreds of thousands of papers. So you can just pull what you want. Okay. That's what a lot of people are doing. And like Joel Seedman, 90-degree training, you got a paper there. You want full range training, you got a paper there. Two diametrically opposed ideas, but you can pull research and justify either one of them, right? Yeah. So basically, in order to be in the conversation, you have to be in that field. So they look at functional fitness a lot like they would look at pelvic floor papers. Okay. I've actually heard someone say from this no bullshit physio, actually, that, I don't look at pelvic floor papers because, there's too much woo-woo junk in there. Right. And you like, I can see the argument here, right? Because there is a lot of bad research out there. That is true. And the more I've actually researched these research-based, I would say they're newer breed of research-based guys, I see them as rebelling against bad science. They're looking at themselves like they're cleaning up bad science. And somewhat they are. You know what I mean? And I like it. A lot of the stuff that I'm like, actually, I agree with that. Oh, that's pretty good. You know, like that. Because here's the thing: when I was in school, I would be criticized for taking too long with patients. Okay.
Mm.
And I actually had someone pull me aside and said, you'd never be able to do this in private practice, or you'll never be able to do this. And I was like, okay, watch me. Right. And that's what I did. I moved to a small town and I spend 45 minutes to an hour with each patient. I have a communication with them. I try to, treat this person like a holistic human being, even though, people come to me with injuries. I'm like, what are the factors in their life? What do they do on a regular basis? One of the questions I asked is, or I always ask is, what did you do repetitively growing up? Maybe there's something there. Maybe like, what do you do now? What are your interests? It's like you try to get into the mind frame of just being a human interacting, and that brings you a lot of fruit in itself. That and asking the right questions, right? So in that sense, I do actually operate a lot like these research-based guys want you to operate like, but with a major difference is that I went away from the research as the ultimate truth. And I just look at it like another system. I'm like, oh, what's the research saying? And instead of being like, that's the only thing, you must not touch anything but the research. It's like, guys, you're being a little bit too dogmatic on this. You're treating it like a religion. Like maybe go outside your system and see what's there. And that's what we're trying to do. We're literally trying to take everyone that we don't agree with necessarily, bring them on. It's like, what do you got to say?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, what is wrong with doing that?
I personally don't think there is anything wrong with getting multiple perspectives, but I want to rewind for a second and touch on that religious element, because I often hear, people are like, oh, you're saying that you're equating science to religion, but it's nothing like religion. When you say they're treating it like a religion, what are the qualities or the mindsets or the philosophies that make science become religious? Like, how do you have to behave in order for something to be religious?
Well, you don't let any other info in. You'll only look at a certain subset of info, which would be awesome if it was great info. But when they start arguing amongst each other and saying, oh, we don't actually know, it's like, the info's not that good. So I have to go outside the info. And if I would frame it like that, everyone would be like, yeah, I do that too. It's like, I don't think you do. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you go outside the systems if you're spending 5 hours a day pulling papers, like I heard a no bullshit physio said he does. You're probably not going outside the system, and you're treating it a little bit too religiously. And I did that as well, in terms of the thought process is this. You know what? You take the consensus of the science. These are the most brilliant minds in the world. You look at that first. And if that doesn't say something, if that doesn't work, or which it always does if you're research based, right? There's always something that you find that you can use. Then I go outside the system. Until then, the research is number one, and everything else is down here. Okay. Where now I look at it like, what's the research saying? Oh, these guys are saying this. That's great. That's a whatever topic it is. Some topics there is amazing research on, and some topics there's not any research on, right? So I can't just be like, I'm going to only use research, the RCT, randomized control trials, and there is a hierarchy when you actually look at the research as well, right? Randomized control trials, double-blind, placebo controlled is up top, which I'm going to argue shouldn't even be up top, okay? Yeah, I know it sounds crazy, okay? But I'm going to make the argument there over a series of shows like this, okay? And then, it goes prospective studies, retrospective studies, where you're looking at groups over a period of time. So long-term studies, cohort studies, where you're taking certain sections of groups and you're following over time. And then there's, case studies. Those are the lowest. That's, something that happened in a clinic, or, a personal training encounter that's documented and, studied. Doing a study like that, you probably won't get in a good journal. That's the whole thing, right? And then that brings up another aspect of it. It's like the journals, the publications. How do you even get the research into a good publication in the first place, right? It's like the research, the peer review, a bunch of peers reviewing your work is supposed to be the gold standard there. And like the advantage is that you have a bunch of people that are really smart looking at your work to make sure it's nothing's wrong with it. Okay. They also choose what work comes in. Okay. So the disadvantage is it's gate kept, right? So
Yeah.
there could be information that doesn't get in there because it doesn't fit a paradigm. And my assertion is that there's a new paradigm coming, whether you like it or not. Okay. So um, people are going outside the research, whether you like it or not. People are sharing information outside the research, whether you like it or not. Now, the question is, who owns the authority over the public? And is the question public policy, or is it because there's a whole public policy end that I don't really want to touch. This is like,
Right.
if I work in government and what is the best policy for all the people? I'm not really that interested in that. You know, the way I look at it is I have a small clinic. I look at it like an art. Okay. It's the art of move. It's the art of touch. It's all that stuff. And a research-based guy would scratch his head and pull his hair out going, art, there's no art in this. What you do is you take the best research and you do that. And it's like, no, I have a human being in front of me. He's not like, even though 7 out of 10 people might get this ailment. So let's say treatment A, 7 out of 10 people will get better. I've already diagnosed it. Treatment A is what I need. And the research said 7 out of 10 will get better. I still have that person in front of me. I got to figure out if they're the 7 out of 10 or the 3 out of 10, right? Like, I don't know which one they are, even though I don't operate like that. It's just human to human interaction. I don't do like, here's the thing. A lot of time they're trying to clean up science again, right? And that includes cleaning up, chiro, physio. It's a lot of physios, right? So they're trying to clean up their field. You're a bad physio if you're, doing things from 20 years ago that have no scientific rigor behind them. Okay. And I can see that because there is a lot of that going on in a lot of therapy, right? So an example with that would be, putting someone on a treatment plan for like a year straight. It's like, you need to come in 4 times a week for a year, or your, C5 is going to go out, right? And this happens, okay? And I see it all the time. People come into me and say stuff like this, and I'm like, whoa, that is wild stuff that the, the last therapist was telling them, right? So, and like, this is daily, okay? So this is a major issue that is out there, and it needs to be cleaned up. So great, these guys are doing that. That's awesome, right? But you're still butting heads with this biomechanics stuff, because get this, biomechanics to them means the biomechanics that's published, which is not even what like this field is. This field is antithetical to the biomechanics that is in.
Yeah, when you say this field, you kind of mean alternative functional fitness and people who are looking at gait mechanics from an observational perspective, not from, like you said, levers and what Goethe would call cadaver science, right? Not to make a false dichotomy here, but the mainstream biomechanic research versus that might look at things a little bit more in a linear fashion versus some of the rotational elements. I mean, I'll even use the example of David Weck, who has been fighting with SMU and Landsbrook's locomotion for ages about his head over foot thing, where the brace the core model and a stable neutral head as you're running is is dynamically happening, versus the head over foot model. Like, he's been arguing with him about that for a long time. And it's like, can you just acknowledge head over foot? Like, it's right here in front of you. He's even, David even went to the SMU website and pulled up this video footage of their 3D gait analysis model. And it's literally showing head over foot. And he's like, how are they not looking at this? How are they still saying it's brace the core and spine neutral when they literally have their 3D analysis model, and the actual data from their studies is showing the opposite?
Because that's what the research says. And that's what, like, it doesn't necessarily even have to be the research. I think in this case, it's like a wives' tale in science. So, because that happens too, right? You don't know where the first principles came from. You don't know where the first idea came from, and then you just build upon it. This happens all the time in science, right? Like, again, in science classes in university, I never once heard anybody objectify to a theory, a base theory. You just accept theories, and you have to, because it's like you have to do work upon those theories. That's what science is. You can't question everything, or not everyone can question everything. Some people are cut out for it, some people aren't, right? To me, I've always been skeptical, and now I'm skeptical of the skeptics. Okay. So it's like the skeptical guys in science are the people cleaning up the science in their own mind. There's a Greg Lehman, Adam Meekins, Aaron Kubal, I don't know, he's on TikTok. He's always like, this physiotherapist or chiropractor said this, it's ridiculous, right? And then he was like, study said this instead, right? A lot of his stuff is good, again, but a lot of it is pretty bad, right?
It lacks nuanced thinking.
It lacks nuance is really what it is. And then I go on to listen to his podcast. I'm like, maybe I'm missing something. And again, it's a lot of good stuff, a lot of stuff that I've identified in my own world. I'm like, okay, this guy nailed it, right? But then sometimes they just go way off into some, theory that is itself unscientific. We'll get into these as we go. I just wanted to give more of a 30,000 foot view because there's so much to it, and I kind of uncovered a world here that I didn't know about.
Yeah, this is an overview episode, and that's why we're announcing a series and kind of giving like a big broad perspective.
Yeah. So a guy like Aaron Kubal, I'm like, I wonder how long he's been in practice. He's only been in telehealth practice for a year. He has no experience, and he's just like cutting everything up. It's like, you're cutting up probably 80% of what needs to be cut up, and 20% is not so good, right? So, I mean, that's pretty good stat. So can't fault him for that. And a lot of people have good information now. So I see a lot of people in the research-based world being about 28, 29 to like 33, 34. Okay. So they're in a younger, well, I'm 39, right? So they're in like a younger demographic where I think the internet really hit hard back then. And, they're learning something in class and then they can debunk it like within seconds, right? So it's just like, why are you still teaching me this? And a lot of them have complaints from, university. It's just like, and again, I've heard podcasts where they're like, what I learned in university was pretty much all wrong, right? And I had the same experience, right? There's a lot of info that was incorrect. And I guess that's just to be expected because science has to, evolve. It is basically the excuse, right? Science evolves. And that's why we had it wrong before. But there's also delay. It's like to get new info takes a long, long time. To get rid of old info that's incorrect also takes a long, long time because everybody has to agree. This is why a guy like Lance Brooks, the guy that fights with David Weck or, the head over foot guy anyway. David Weck says head over foot. Lance Brooks says, no, spine straight. He can't change it if he wanted to because the consensus now is that the spine is straight. And it's weird because now, I'm running with this beautiful head over foot. I'm doing all these complicated maneuvers. You watch slow-mo, you see head over foot all the time in the best athletes. Even people walking down the street, the spine straight thing is just weird, okay? Now, I see guys like Peter O'Sullivan, a physiotherapist. He's like finally talking about not bracing the core, and he had a paper that he sat on for 2 years because he didn't want to come out. He called it coming out, right? And then he had all the support from these physios who were like, thank you for that. You're brave. I'm like, that's brave? I'm like, wow. Like, what are we coming to right now? Okay, guys, you can relax your core because, when you hurt whatever part you hurt, like if it's a knee, your muscles around your knee are going to cramp up to help you out. So you're basically cramping up your core to stop you from your nice movement. Relax. Go have a walk. Let yourself go head over foot and have a nice sway. Okay. Peter O'Sullivan did it. I'm doing it. David Weck's doing it. Lance Brooks, you do it too.
Yeah. Well, actually, David Weck is knocking right now. Should we let him in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're gonna put him in here. Let's see if we. I think I just added him to the conversation here. But yeah, that's basically it. It really sounds like. What happened? Did I kick him out by accident? Oh, no, there he is. He's signing in. But this is when you say he couldn't this is this idea of you have to come out and challenge the mainstream narrative as someone who is
Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. You're just signing in. You just took a second to load there.
Okay.
What's going on, David?
We were just talking about you.
A network connection error.
Oh, you're just connecting
I'm a
to your
little
Wi-Fi.
less tech savvy. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay. Yeah, I just was tuned in. I heard like the last 3 minutes about a physio who figured this out 2 years ago and then was so apprehensive to tell the community, his colleagues, his peers who review him and ostracize him. God forbid he just, stray from the narrative, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what happens, right? Like, um, you have to have some sort of consensus, right? So it's very hard when you're working in a group. It's like if you see something obvious, you're like, hey guys, the head's going like this. You know what I mean? The body's swaying and there's nice fluidity and movement. It's like, no, we've had this theory for a long time. And I've heard over and over and over again. And I should have challenged this at the time. Greg Akevsky's been debunked. Spinal engine has been debunked. It's like, where has that been shown?
Well,
Because
you know
I'd love
who
to
else?
get it.
You know who else said that is
Who?
Dr. Stuart McGill. Basically, in his interview with Brett Contreras, he knew Grakovetsky and they were buddies. They'd go have a beer kind of a thing. But the way that he sort of just chuckled it off as if to say, ha ha ha, back in those days, he entertained something, but he certainly isn't correct. And it's, I think you guys talking about this is sort of it's the crack in the dam that basically it can't be plugged now because we're in the internet. It's the information age. And then once enough critical mass happens where it's like, wait a minute, the king ain't wearing robes. It's like, whoa. And then we can see it. And now we have 3D motion capture from SMU, Locomotor Performance Institute Laboratory. I mean, that's the number one place in the world as far as they're citing their science from. And what I view because that I take this stuff very personally. You guys know that is better than anyone, right? And yeah. I think we're all scientists in our own right, and we have different methods of how we go about our scientific process. And you can't just be behind the camera, and you can't just be in front of the camera. And the problem is so many of the experts today are just behind the camera. They've never been in front of the camera. They aren't exploring every single day how to get faster, how to get more fluid, how to beat up a guy who's bigger than you.
So this is really important because what you're talking about is a democratization of the truth. And it's saying because when you're talking about research based, like it was pretty common. And it still is very common. It's still a very common mindset that the authority is the science. The science is the best information that we have. And we were talking about the limitations of how science can look at certain variables. Being research-based and research-informed is actually a very good thing. It's a part of the equation, but you still have to think for yourself. And not being able to outsource your own critical judgment. We were talking about how certain people are still, they're still in the research-based world. They're still kind of, sticking their nose up at functional fitness and biomechanics systems, but they're also trying to have more integrity and looking at, well, this is bad science, this is biased, this is looking at the wrong thing. But when you're talking about, it's like, well, you can't stop this momentum of people sharing the information that they're going to share, right? Whether or not it's research-based information, you have people like yourself, like Will, like myself, who are on the ground researching and experimenting their own experience. And oftentimes even personal experience is looked at as a negative factor when you're trying to find truth, because it's like, well, data from scientific studies is more reliable than personal experience. To a degree, you do have to be aware of the limitations of your own personal experience, but you also have to realize that personal experience is a really good launching point to ask questions that might diverge from the mainstream narrative of science as a whole.
It's the only way. Feeling is knowing. Yeah, I could not know what I know had I not experienced it physically. And it was the physical experience of going to Corfist May 1st, 2010. It was that experience of feeling it. And you both know it. It's true. You have a skeletal circuit. You create instantly a different pressure, length, tension relationship within the body, tensegrity, and the hands. How could they not matter so much, right? They're the thing that's dealing with the object that you're playing with. They're the thing that's, and when they're empty and they're free, you can figure out ways in which that it's just follow the figure eight and have continuity with the spiral. And now you don't have to stop. You don't got to stop. It's fluid, right? And the science on this is we, the artists, right? The ones in the arena, right? Fighting it out to find it. We're the ones who bring to the scientists what to study. Mm-hmm. It's not their decision of, oh, well, we're going to study this. No, you have your own confirmation bias. Both parties have to participate together. Because if you're thinking of your own research, well, you're just trying to prove your point 9 times out of 10. Am I wrong? No, I'm not. You see what I mean?
It's a very interesting point, and something you said a couple minutes ago about science and methods. It's basically right now what's happening is if you're research based, you start at looking at the pool of research, the watered down pool of research, I mind you. That's where your starting point is. Okay. And you have to theorize from there. So you're only looking at a certain subset, a very small, minute detail of movement and research. And then you're devising your experiments from there. Well, you forgot the movement part. You forgot the doing part of it. Right. And it's literally everyone thinks that that's what you do in the research world. Go to the research first and then devise your experiments from there. That's why you're not devising good experiments, guys. It's like, that's why the methods are all off. And like when we actually dive into some of this research, the methods are very, like, a lot of these are just terrible. Right.
Well, and also as someone who conducted some studies in the early days with the Bosu ball, because it's what you do to, prove your product and market it basically. And so we worked with San Diego State University and we devised sort of metrics and tests. We worked with the Sharp Institute of Health and, in their critical balance unit, and we devised sort of measurables and standards. And, we didn't I basically volunteered it. And so I was funding it with my time and effort and collaboration because the professor at the university and the clinician at the, I guess it was a balance center where people who had severe impairment would go. And we were collaborating to get deeper in terms of how can we help people to a greater extent, right? So like that's the motivating factor for what we're doing. Now, insight was gleaned. I didn't do a good job in terms of, peer reviewing and marketing the research, but I can tell you that some of these studies, we have to find 16 participants. Okay, like who has time and who has the inclination to participate in the study in the first place, right? The good athlete is playing soccer right now, so they're not available, right? And how much time was devoted to the skill acquisition of the task at hand that you're studying? The 16 participants, we did 6 weeks where, 8 of them did this and 8 of them did that. And like you're saying, Anthony, that can be a good departure point, right? But it certainly is not going to tell you the whole picture. And what is maddening to the creatives like myself who pride themselves on their integrity and their can-do capacity, right? I'm a movement coach who can move, right? And so I can teach you all the nuance, right? I didn't learn what to teach you sitting down in a chair watching a PowerPoint. Like, that's not what I'm doing. But what I'm doing has to be reduced down to the PowerPoint, one slide, head over foot. I mean, if we as a think about what the potential is right now, because this is the positive peer pressure that I was alluding to months ago, okay? Because this is the one where now it's going to get to the point where it's going to be like boom, boom, boom. It's going to be like popcorn. There's not going to be too many pops, and there's going to be little flutters of pops, but then it's going to be pop, 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 pop. And then if you hold slow to your braced core, neutral spine, you're going to start equivocating by saying, "Whoa, well, I never actually said." Okay, whatever. We can go back and we can cite where you did say what you were saying. Yeah. And this core stability, right? Anti-rotation, that became the thing, just like instability training became the thing. So things become the thing. and then they, they sort of, the pendulum will swing.
Yeah.
And there's a, go
I
ahead.
want to bring, I want to bring up a point when you were talking about devising your study, where it was like, okay, I got to get 16 participants, but you aren't considering these factors, like how, like you said, how much time did they devote to practicing their craft? How physically competent are they beforehand? Even when there's like a study that has like a pretty large sample size, like studies look at individual variables typically, and they look at they like. The issue is, and the reason that it ends up being more of an art than a science with movement practitioners in general, like you do have to have a basis of understanding of your anatomy, and you have to understand like that having that baseline is really, really good. But at some point you kind of have to be able to, like, I'm a musician, right? And there's this saying in music that a jazz musician, I think it was Charlie Parker, said that you should learn as much theory as you can and practice as much as you can, and then let all of that go and just play. Right. And so when you're thinking about movement, like if you're thinking about the variables that you read in a study, it's going to jack up your movement, because you're going to be moving robotically because you're thinking robotically about something that has so many variables that are supposed to happen subconsciously, that are happening even beyond the level of comprehension. Like, the fact of the matter is we know so little about the human body. We don't know a whole whack about the human body. And when you're looking at something as multivariable as human movement and biomechanics, where people aren't even recognizing fascial biotensegrity, for example, people are saying that fascia doesn't even have a role in force production. It's like,
people are saying that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
and they have to say it. They have to say it because it's not accounted for in the biomechanics.
Oh, okay, I see. Got it.
You know what I mean? Like,
okay.
no, but that's huge though, because.
Oh no, I mean, listen, this is to the point where when I got your text, Anthony, just now saying, "Hey, we're live," so that I could tune in and knock on the door, right? I'm thinking. Hold on, just 1 second.
Yeah.
Can you just carry on the conversation?
Yeah, of course.
Just super quick. Super
Anthony,
quick.
I wanted to say something here.
Okay,
so how would you, so if I wanted to know how to move really well, okay, and I wanted to get smooth movement, and I see David Weck, he's in his 50s, right? Or you're around 50, right? So 52, and he moves amazingly, okay? And I watch most 50-year-olds are not moving very well at all and sore all the time, and they go for a run and it'll be a disaster. Okay. So what is David Weck doing differently? How would you engineer a study here? What a current research-based person would do is look at the totality of the research that is currently there, have participants in a control group and in a group that is studying whatever they're studying. Okay. And then you find a variable there, and then you take that, and that's your variable. Or what would I do? What would you do? I'd watch David move, and I'd reverse engineer how he'd move. And that is the difference, right? Like, where would you start with the study? They almost always have to start with the current research. Which,
well,
you're in trouble.
Well, just real quick before that little interruption. So when you texted me, I was thinking Feldenkrais. It just came in my mind. It's like I draw so much influence from Feldenkrais, okay? Feldenkrais is that minimalistic, get to the least amount of tension possible so that you can discern the little micro gradations of force, and that sensitivity is your education, because feeling is knowing. The reason why the person who goes to the golf coach can't do it is because they can't internalize and make use of the cue. And this, now, when you were talking, Will, just now about the research and the limitations of it, here's what I would do. If I wanted to study the way David Weck moves, here's what I would do. Get one batch of people here and make them jump rope or do whatever the hell they want with the rope. I don't even care. And then have one group roll the rope, okay, with repetition. So, I mean, you're going to do 1,000 reps a day, which is not actually that much. And you may just fall in love with it and you do 10,000 a day. So that's what I would do to do a study. And then I would test any life task. I don't care if it's mathematics or anything. Your ability to pick up juggling or whatever and do twins. Find 40 sets of twins. One twin does, whatever the hell they want with the rope. Okay. I don't care. And then one of them learns all 4 patterns and it just becomes muscle memory. Now you are tuned. Your instrument is ready to be played. You can internalize the cue. And now you have the self-independence. That is the only way you can be a lifelong learner. And this, at Weck Method, that's what we do. You are on the path to independence. We're going to get the ropes in under your belt. And the thing about ropes, and I was thinking about this earlier today, how do we get the strong guys to take interest in the ropes? They're so strong and big that that's not fun. And then the rope is light, and so they're not getting good sensitivity. I mean, I was thinking, what do we maybe put some wrist weights on them, little sand wrist weights, a little heavier rope, and then have them just do the dragon roll, right? Well, I don't even care if you're all big and you bench press 1 million and you can't even button your shirt. Well, then I don't care if you even do this in the beginning. What I want you to feel is I want you to feel that boom, that dragon, that turn, and that internal torsion rotating to external torsion. People don't recognize that this sort of boom, that power right there. So I don't know if I got cut off. You guys sort of froze.
Yeah. Will, what stood out to you there?
You talking about internal external torsion that exists pretty easily to be able to witness. But where is that in the research? That is still science because it's mechanics, it's engineering, it's external torsion. You can see the torque, you can work with the torque. So there's no research, but it's a scientific principle.
So, and see, here's what it is. I know martial science, and martial science is ridiculed by this PhD scientist, but I'll kick your ass if you want to come and fight me, right? So that's martial science. Martial science is understanding fundamental principles, and one of them is move without moving. So what this internal and external torsion does for me is it redistributes the manner in which I can suspend my head, the potential of where my body's going to go, without changing my center of mass. So I can be perched on one and I can go to the other. Then I can drop whenever I want to drop. So, and the reflex, what makes you fast and agile is your ability to drop and lift your legs so that you're not jumping. You're just bing. It's a reflex that you were able to drop your center and then get under it and go.
Right, which is like, these are for us as people who move, these make sense, right? Now, from a scientific perspective, what are the variables that you're going to test to demonstrate that, right? And
I'm going to say anything, shuffling a deck of cards. If you roll the rope, you're going to get that global harmony. You do everything better. That's my hypothesis.
But then like Will, for example, like when you're looking at the variables that they're testing, like in the improvements, like, something like hypertrophy is really easy to measure because you're just, measuring circumference of certain muscle groups, or you're just, strength is easy because it's usually a strength specific task. Like, what are the improvements in movement that you would be measuring to like, how would you define the variables of movement fluidity or efficiency of force transfer, or things like the things that we are primarily concerned with as in terms of economy of movement? How would you define that in the context of a scientific study?
Back to my original hypothesis that the language isn't there. It's a new paradigm. That's why, like, at the end of the paradigm, Thomas Kuhn, Scientific Revolution, Structure of Scientific Revolution, says at the end of a paradigm, what they're going to do, what the scientists do, is they put the new information and try to put it in their old models. Okay. Where I saw Pat Davidson was talking about spirals. So I put a video of spirals up and I'm like, there's the spirals with nice fluid movement. I'm doing head over foot here as I'm doing the spirals, right? Thank you for that, Sensei David Weck, right? So that is almost like a marriage of the models, the collapsing galaxy theory of movement. It's like,
what is a galaxy? What's the galaxy theory of movement?
He's saying basically that, like, the structure, the proximal structures, if you see someone who's not moving fluidly, the distal structures will be closer to the proximal, where someone who's fluid can have the proximal structures farther away, but he doesn't recognize spirals. He doesn't know how to flow the energy in the circular figure eight patterns, which they'll be like, figure eight, that's crazy. You're crazy. Well, I can show you it in 2 seconds, right? So it's not crazy.
Right.
So But the paradigm just isn't there. They can't study it because they're like, where is it in the research? It's not there.
Well, and
So
also, the counterintuitive nature that if we are to freeze frame that 3D motion capture from SMU, and we freeze frame when the runner, the model of the runner is landing on the right foot. I mean, if I'm a biomechanist and I'm just used to looking at, pictures hung straight and doorways straight, I'm gonna look at that and say, oh man, the structure's all kinked over, and like, oh wow, you're leaking power. That's not good for your back. I mean, but it's a counterintuitive understanding because the doing and the feeling is the actual knowing. And so when you put your body in that position, you're like, oh my gosh, this is remarkably easy. Like, this is truly remarkably easy. And staircase, okay, everybody, march up the stairs, head in the middle, and be sharp and precise. Videotape yourself, and don't let yourself move with the head over the foot. Now, intentionally position your head over your foot up the stairs. So what happens is someone like a Pat Davidson, right? And I'm not
I like
really
his stuff.
yeah, a lot of people like a lot of his stuff. But my first introduction to him, okay, I didn't know who he was. I saw a video where he was talking about like bad movement, and he was saying like, chimpanzees don't move well because their head is moving, side to side. And you want to move straight. And it's just like I was being a jerk back then, so I made some comment. But it's this, he's standing in front of a room of 18 people, let's say, okay? They are there, they're mesmerized by the message that, they paid a lot of money, they flew over there, they want to get their money's worth, they're paying attention, they're thinking about it. As far as they know, they're learning correct information. So it's, okay, there's another layer of reinforcement that disincentivizes me to look for more because I already know the answer. You see what I mean? And I learned it from an authority. And it's new leadership now.
It's very interesting because I don't even think Pat Davidson would be considered research-based to like the hardcore research-based guys. I think they make fun of guys like Pat Davidson, Bill Hartman for, I think those guys go into more pressure. Like
bro science?
No, it's not like that. It's like the pressures of the body as you move. So it's almost like they're like, okay, the pressure moves from right to left. It's like, yeah, does it coil? You know what I mean? It's just like, yes,
does
it
spiral?
But, yeah, exactly. Does it spiral? Does it coil? He called it an arc, which is Pat Davidson called it an arc, which is, oh, okay, you're getting closer.
And also
closer.
I must point this out because, my ego still matters to me. I'm sorry to say. I've been saying this, as far as I know, I'm the first to hold my hand up and say, hey guys, coil, head over foot, spinal engine, like it actually is that. And now, and I think it's a good thing, but I do want to point it out, if somebody else starts to say the same thing, right? Oh, when we were talking anti-rotation, we didn't mean that there's no movement, right? Mm-hmm. We were arcing just a little. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is now a way in which that they can sort of take their ego off the plank. You know what I mean? And not jump off the plank, but sort of walk it back. And now this is that ridicule, reject, obvious all along. Of course. And I want to get to that place and get beyond my own personal shortcomings of being egoistic in this thing and having animosity toward others, which I do. I mean, I want to get rid of all that in my life, but the thing is, I can't get rid of it until the change happens. You see what I mean? Like, if the irritant is still there, I'm going to be irritated. And we are so close to getting to consensus because this is the positive peer pressure that I've been alluding to, we've been discussing, that when we're talking about, like, okay, this is not politics, and you don't have a press corps who say, "Oh, I'm not going to answer your question."
But
you
got to answer politics, right?
Now.
And this is the
but they
issue.
Got to answer the questions. They got to answer the questions because of social media. Because enough trainers out there will be like, "Wait a minute, why aren't you answering that question? I paid good money to learn from you."
Well, and now here's an example of how a scientist could basically take a movement reality like head over foot and be like, okay, well, we're going to try and fit this in our own model. So there are lateral forces that happen when you run, and we do need a stable core because in order to resist those lateral forces and those rotational forces and recoil, we need this stable core. So the more we're training this Pavlov press, then when we have that rotational force, we'll recoil to the other foot. And our stable core training is what's making head over foot efficient in the first place. They're going to try and reverse engineer it.
Well, okay, but you see, Will said it, and it needed to be said, and it really crystallized it to what it is. This is a new paradigm. So we don't have to frame things in any of the old way. This is a new paradigm, and because you're not voted into office officially, where the Congress and the Senate in the U.S., I mean, the average age is like 75 years old or something like that, and they're voted in there and they stay there forever. This is the consumer's going to vote with their pocketbook, and right now, the money in sports performance is mainly made by, the suburban facility that services the kids, right? The parents work out during the day and then the kids come in after school. The pro athletes that are the excitement pull, they're in season more than half the season. You're not making your money from them. So if you want to maintain relevancy, as soon as this sort of, the hip to the scam, like people understand, like, why isn't my child propulsing? Like, why isn't my child doing the ropes? Like, why isn't my child running head over foot? Why are you teaching my child to put himself into neutral no man's land where he can't move now? He can go up and down. That's all he can do. Why are you making him strong in the position we want to pass through as opposed to stay, right? Any martial artist knows, like, flat space, you better have a good reason. And
that's one of the areas that science does not really touch is martial arts. Well, like they're getting in with strength and conditioning, but like results rule, But
yes.
Yeah.
But Will, again, here's what it is. It's yin and yang, fight and flight is objective and fight is always subjective. You can never say that this is definitively scientifically superior, because Sugar Ray Robinson.
But what if I took, get this, what if I took 20 people and I got 10 people to punch, right? And then 10 people to kick. And then if, the kicks, okay. I'm joking. I'm literally joking because you can't do it because the next set of MMA math, how it never works out, right? Like I'm joking. I'm saying that, science would try to take the variables and take one variable like a punch and be like, okay.
Well, what you could measure is, because it is a force output, is you come in day one, punch it. Now on week 12, punch it, right? But that wouldn't. But
that's not a fight. That's like a variable,
right?
Of strength, right? Mm-hmm. Which is where everyone wants to go, right? Like the force production is the sexy part of everything especially with sports. Everything's framed right now with running and all that with force production. Force velocity is really the hot thing, right? And I mentioned this on a podcast and I got straw man saying, oh, actually, I said that most, what's it called? Sprinting assessments are done side view, which is absolutely
almost
true,
all of
right?
them. That's how you find out who wins the race, by the way.
Yeah, but I mean,
timing and even getting an accurate start and stop, you got to be on the side.
But it was the idea that locomotive research and gait analysis is done from a side view. And you got Strawman. What did he say? He was like,
he said that no, that's not true. And I said that the force velocity thing, that most of the locomotion is force velocity. Actually, no, it's done with balance. Like you were saying earlier, take you to a lab and it's balance for elderly people and people with Parkinson's. That's how they study it. So that's what most locomotion is actually studying. That's a red herring, really, because when we're talking about, it's a red herring. So when we're talking about running and movement and biomechanics, they're going from the side. They're not looking at the front. That's why the SMU Motor Lab missed the head over foot, because they're not looking for it. You're not looking for it.
Listen, I was an athlete all my life, and I was never, ever instructed to move my head, okay? It was always the opposite. Keep your head nice and still, right? It was always hold 2 potato chips in your hand so you're not tight in the hands, and let your facial muscles do that, right? And just keep yourself perfectly still. That's just tried and true, right? That's how it was coached.
Let's be careful with this one, because this is an easy straw man, because I can take a 100-meter runner it bothers me a lot because I love watching it. and you get so much from it, but you can just see anything there because it's
Yes.
really force production that rules that. And that's why you
Yes.
study it, because it's 100 meters, the pinnacle of Olympics. And they want to extrapolate that into all movement and rehab and, how things should be done from 100 meter. Let's get away from that, in my personal opinion, just because of those facts. Right.
Well, Will, I must say that I appreciate you and your background and your capacity and your passion so much, because you have the capacity to navigate this and see it through the treacherous waters of the conventional. You see, I would get hung up on straw mans, lose my temper, and then rah, 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 and we're back to square one. But what you're doing is you're saying, up, not so fast. I know both of these worlds intimately, and I am here to help humanity.
Exactly.
Ultimately, what we're doing is we want to provide the best possible knowledge so that everybody's got a better, rise the whole tide for everyone. And physical, it's the most practical, it's the cheapest, and it's the one that we can actually do because we are so far off. And it's so simple to walk incorrectly or poorly, and it's so simple to walk well. I mean, it literally is your knowledge. That's it.
So I want to bring
Appreciate that a lot.
I want to bring something up. This idea that, when you were talking about the 3D model and the side view analysis, they missed the head over foot because they're looking at it and they're not looking for head over foot. And this kind of goes back to something that you were talking about earlier, where it's like we start from this pool of data and this pool of research, and then you extrapolate your questions based on the research that you've read. And so you're deriving the questions and you're deriving the variables that you want to look for based on previous data from previous science, versus the approach that I think, and this is, I've been trying to figure out, it's like, where's the dichotomy of thinking, or where's the difference in thinking? I think the difference in thinking is through experience and through movement experience. You might experience something that you don't have an explanation for, or you might have an observation because you're obsessed with movement and you're obsessed with movement economy and you're obsessed with becoming better. You might observe something that you don't have necessarily an explanation for, or you don't have a prescription on how to improve it. So you would ask a question that is different than the questions that are being made by people who are deriving research based on research. It's like you're creating extrapolations of data that you've previously read and biomechanical understanding from like an academic standpoint, versus when you have an experiential passion for movement and for training people. You're not just experientially yourself, but you're spending all your time observing the behaviors of your clients. You're going to derive different questions than are being asked by the science. And I say, the science in quotation marks is in like the consensus, the research based on research, based on research, based on research, the narrative that forms over scientific consensus that might not be asking the same questions as a movement artist would. So that's sort of the, like, Will, I don't know if that's a good summation of kind of what you've been noticing. And because my question is, like, if you're evidence-based and you're closed off to other information, my question that I was going to ask earlier in this episode is, what do you think they're missing perspective-wise? And what do you think are other good inputs of data to help derive a deeper sense of truth?
So your question assumes that I think that the current paradigm is sufficient, and I don't think that they can take the art of how to move and put it into a study. You know what I mean? Like they don't have the language for it. They don't even have the language for
right,
head over foot.
So the question,
engine, none of that's there. So, 3 planes of motion versus 3D movement. It's just it's not there in description. It can't be there because the pool of knowledge doesn't have it yet. And that's all that they draw upon.
So so my question is, like, where studies are not reliable for that because it's operating on a different paradigm, it's operating from a different like set of language. What are other inputs of data that will help you derive truth, experience, observation? Like, what are the things that you think will factor into helping people derive a deeper understanding?
I think actually going back to the scientific method. The scientific method is like, let's say David's movement, right? You're not going to derive that. You're not going to see how he does it by getting the current research. I would have to go back and be like, okay, what is the actual scientific method here? The scientific method is forming a hypothesis. And again, we went over, you have to have a pool of knowledge to even form the hypothesis and the theory in the first place. Then you go to, observation. What is it? Help me out here. My mind's drawing a blank. We're going from observation to actually doing the experiment, right?
Yeah, testing.
Testing. Okay, so basically, it's you observe, you formulate a theory, you test. Okay, where's drawing the pool of knowledge in any of that? So a lot of these guys that are science-based aren't even doing any science. They're just looking at the pool of current knowledge, and that's where they stop. Where I would go, let's observe David. Let's put him in slow-mo. Let's try to copy the movements. Let's ask him what he's doing if he's available. You know what I mean? Let's try to find the truth here in movement versus just going to a study, right?
Right. Two things. First one, how can we help the existing structure, paradigm, community? How can we help so it's not a burn the whole thing down scenario and it's the fastest, most expeditious path forward to progress where we can all remain our own individuals with our own opinions, but we'll all be on a similar foundation where we're not getting like people, we don't have to ask that question anymore because we come to the consensus as good sports in the contest of ideas. You know, the biomechanical reality of this spiral continuity movement, it is what it is. And the fact that we now have every picture or video of a human being actually doing it is always anecdotal and it's never scientific. Okay. So you'll never win the science over. But as soon as you put the 3D map on the guy and now you see the model doing it, well, now we're talking, that's scientific.
So
Yes.
I want to just throw something in because we were talking about the scientific method. So I Googled it to see what it is, and in a lot of modern definitions of the scientific method, they actually added a step, which is after your original observation and your question, you research the topic area. So you put research and reading the current understanding as a prerequisite to forming a hypothesis, because if you don't have the research behind forming the hypothesis, then you can't test your hypothesis with an experiment.
I like the old method.
you make an observation, you ask a question, you form a hypothesis, and you test it, and you analyze the data, you report the conclusion. You don't have to add research topic area in there to derive information.
Well, it's all done within the system. Like most studies are done within the university system. Some are done publicly or privately, but most are done within the university system. So that's how it has to be done, right? Like, I don't really care for that one. That's brand new. It's very new within the terms of, within the scientific timeline. We're talking right at the end. Okay. They just added that in. That's, well known, or not well known, but it should be that step was added in very, very recently. Okay. And that step will ensure that the new paradigm does not come through. So that step needs to go.
Yeah, there you go, because you're back in the same bucket. Well,
exactly.
the other thing, so I do want to get back to how can we constructively, create the foundation forward. So, or if not, get to any kind of conclusion, at least put that in sort of in the thinking cap to gestate and formulate, like, okay, what is the plan here, right? How can we fast teach human beings how to take better care of themselves, right? Walking stronger with balance. It's so profound, and that's what gets me so giddy and excited about it. And the other thing that I wanted to share was, how, like, if somebody's blind, then there's the synesthesia, so maybe they can harness that capacity to now create an auditory capacity to echolocate, you know what I mean? In the same sense that, like, I'm a biomechanist. I'm an inventor. I'm a biomechanist. That's really what I am. So how do I say this? I lost my train of thought. Refresh me, Will.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little bit lost
Sorry.
there as well.
Okay, what I did, the synesthesia, what it is basically what I wanted to say is, if you stay within one realm or discipline or funnel, category, you may miss the things that you could have gleaned from another science or another subject. And so sorry I got all taken aback.
And that's a very good point, because that brings it back to, why only the research? Why not scientific principles? Why not the SAID principle, right? Like, I think the SAID principle trumps scientific research. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of, I shouldn't say all scientific research. I'm saying that, like, if I'm using the SAID principle, okay, specific adaptations to impose demands, that is a principle of science, right? Like, that is something that, is broadly accepted across many domains. Okay. So where is that in the actual research? Do you know what I mean? Like, I can say you're specifically adapting to a movement as a behavior, okay? Because that makes sense in terms of science. I move a certain way and I adapt in a behavior, okay? So, like, right now I'm sitting on my knees and my feet instead of sitting on my ass, and that's a behavior change, right? And I had to drill it into my body. I specifically am now adapting to this scenario, right? Both in my behavior and the cellular level, right? So where's the study that I have to get for that? You know what I mean? Like, why not work on principles? And I see this whole, like, niche working a lot on mechanics, not so much biomechanics, because that word has been, I shouldn't say hijacked, because they had it in the first place. It's a biomechanical research field. Okay. Is biomechanics to everybody, where this is more movement and actual real life martial application of movement. It's got to be better or it goes, right? So, and that's the difference. One's an art and one is a strict science that just draws upon one field of information. Okay. And that'll, like, I don't see how that coincides the way that you want to, friendly, going forward, without a little bit of give in the research-based world to bring in new ideas.
Okay.
But how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that when you can only draw upon your own model?
Well, okay. I just want to put it out there, because my objective is not to burn it down. My objective is to make it better. And so, I mean, this may just be a case of eat some crow, admit that you were off the track, get on board, and now make yourself better, right? It's the SAID principle is really interesting, because so many trainers sort of use it and abuse it and don't fully understand it. So the stimulus doesn't need to be specific to the task at hand. It has to be specific to the adaptation that I want to get. So I might do something in a swimming pool to get you to do better hang gliding. You know what I mean? So
so that's another thing.
Go ahead.
The specific adaptations to impose demand is actually internal. You're internally adapting. You don't externally adapt.
Well, but
so you do externally adapt. I should say you do, but the actual adaptation happens from within, and you can express the external. However, the adaptations happen from within. I should clarify.
Oh yeah, no, I would agree with that 100%. And that, I mean, that the interaction with the modality or the process or method creates some change in adaptation to the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, what a example would be, if I'm barbell back squatting, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. I'm internally adapting to the demands, and I'm able to lift more weight. So there's the external factor, but I'm actually adapting cellularly inside and nervous system wise, and all the things that come with it. Yeah.
Correct. And what we like to do here now, especially, and really Chris Chamberlain, it's principally his influence, following the both sides utilized theory, or prescription philosophy, is basically, we do squats, but we do them in many different forms, and we will avoid other forms. And so a Zercher squat is one of our favorites because it gives us that internal torsion that we can really be super strong and good range of motion. But when we're doing like an external torsion, for example, on the sole steps uphill, for example, we are staying in external torsion and our range of motion is much smaller as a result of that. And we are, for that specific set, training that quality and maintaining the integrity of that quality as a segment to a more complete and expressed motion, which may pass through, sort of the internal external type of torsion in a reality. But the main point in what I'm saying here is people are so polarized that, a barbell back squat, never, like, and then you have to do it on one leg, and then other people swear by it, right? And people do get good results with it. If you have a football team, it's not a bad exercise to have in the program, right? I mean, so I think what we need to do is we need to encourage the capacity to understand the shades of gray, as it were, and the nuance, and not the gotcha polarized, it's either this or it's that, right?
Yeah.
So and like, for a great example is bench pressing on a Bosu ball with dumbbells. Like, it's a great way to build strength and take care of your shoulders, right? And now people are finding that. And it's, so it was once called by, a lot of the scientific community, that's a circus toy because it's unstable. And now it's like, wait a minute, this is strength training accessory.
So could you talk about that, since this is the science episode, where you were, what happened with the Bosu ball and that whole fiasco? Could you talk specifically about the science that debunked the Bosu ball?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So there was the pivotal study. It was the effects of unstable surface training on, athletic something, right? And it was Cressy et al. And I think highly of Eric Cressy. Okay, so this, anybody listening out there, this is not a hack job or a hatchet job on him. But he conducted a study, and I think they used Dynadiscs, which are, basically rubber cushions or pillows that have no stability. And what people don't understand is that a Bosu ball is a balance of stable and unstable. When the platform is down, the thing is stable, and I can load it with many times body weight, super dynamic, and it's not going anywhere. But there's a perturbations constantly that's, you can't stand perfectly still. There's always going to be some little writing and adjusting, and your job is to get that nuanced, and it just clicked. Oh, perfect. The effects of time. Yeah, that's what it is right there. So what happened was
methods.
Yeah,
can we go straight to the method section?
Yeah, there you go. So they're doing like certain exercises, and it was a very small percentage of the training that not the control group, but that the test group did. So they only did like 3% of their training or less, engaged in this unstable training, and then they tested, and that group got like statistically slower or made less gains, whereas the stable group made more gains across these different tests. And the really unfortunate thing is that the Bosu ball got sort of like connected to this study. And Cressy himself apparently didn't want that to happen. But, he was at the sort of he can't control what T Nation publishes in their, clickbait title, right? So what happened was, people read the headline, and the headline was, Bosu ball, the good, the bad, and the ugly. That was the T Nation article. And we actually got it taken down legally. We said,
really?
Listen, this is it's slandering the Bosu ball, because the study that you're sharing about didn't even use the Bosu ball, and he agreed to take it down. But again, the bell was rung. A lot of people heard it, and that's still where they're resonating, is that misunderstanding that it's a tool.
So I just want to go over the actual methods section real quick. So they had 19 members of the National Collegiate Athletic Association Division I men's soccer team age 18 to 23 years. And the tests that they did was their pre-test was they did a bounce drop jump, a counter movement jump, a 40-yard sprint test, and a T test, which is it's an agility test. And the training that they did for 6 months were 4 sets of 2 speed deadlifts at 55% 1 rep max, 3 sets of 5 barbell deadlifts, dynamic dumbbell lunges, so 3 sets of 8 right and left, low incline barbell press, 1 arm bent over dumbbell row, side bridges. And the only movement that was stable versus unstable was the dumbbell lunge, right? So they were only testing the difference of one exercise on a Dynadisc, which is like an unstable like disc on both sides. Like you said, it's not a Bosu ball. It's a disc that has like it's rounded on both ends. And so it was 6 months of training, and they only had one between pre and post testing. All subjects completed their normal spring strength and conditioning program, but the US group performed the UST intervention over on one of the exercises in each resistance training session over the course of the intervention. It lasted 10 weeks and comprised 27 sessions. The intervention occurred during the off season. Now, just with that bit of information alone, do you think that, while you're still doing deadlifts and, low incline barbell presses and 1 arm bent over rows, the only variable that you're testing is if you're doing your, dumbbell lunges on a Dynadisc, is that enough to give you good data on what the effects of unstable lower body training are on athletic performance?
Let me just say that when you do that type of training, so you're controlling the chaos, because it's, you can't load into that full for fear that it's going to slip out from under you, you're going to twist your ankle. So you would never jump on a Dynadisc because you'd literally snap your ankle, or the potential is there to do that. Very, very likely that you're going to get hurt. So what happens is, if you're only exposed to that controlling chaos for, 4 sets of 3 or whatever the hell it was, you're glitchy and you're hesitant, and you never learn how to, sort of deal with that feedback and bring the nervous system back down to a sense of like, oh, okay, I understand where I am. You're sort of in this frantic kind of a thing. And so, and what they concluded in this study was just how deleterious unstable surface training is, because the stimulus was so small. It was like, literally, I'm going to put a little bit of iocane powder into your meal, and woo, now if you don't have the antidote, you're not there. So that was the conclusion from the study. But since I know movement and I know movement training, if you put yourself into a super unstable scenario and you don't give yourself enough time to sort of, well, let me hold on to something and find the balance here, and let me reduce this thing to more of a skill set where now I can actually get something from the exercise, because it's not just all about this chaotic hitchiness, which is apprehensive and it is slow.
David, I don't even think you have to go that far with it. They didn't test anything with the Bosu ball.
No, exactly. I mean?
Like,
yeah,
they didn't.
No,
and
right.
and it's 10 players in one group and 9 players in the other group, and a lot of different variables. I don't know how you test that many variables and just take the unstable surface one and say that did it right there, right? Like,
well, that was
because
the
there's more than 2 variables,
well,
and
was,
only 2 groups of 10 and 9, and has this been replicated since?
Well, listen, we're dealing with exercise. This is a subject that most of the smartest IQs in the world don't really care about. Right? They hire a trainer. And this is, this was in the context of the industry had swung such a pendulum to the unstable surface training. Trainers started doing it, an hour and a half of only that. You know what I mean? We're going to go an extra 30 minutes and do more on the ball. And it was the stability ball that was really the main culprit in this unstable phase or craze. And so what happens is there's profit in prophecy. And if you're a thought leader and you can get out in front of where the pendulum is and where it's going to be, if you're sort of, in the vanguard of the correction, that's where anti-rotation and brace your core stiff and neutral came in. And it stemmed from McGill, because McGill was the spine expert, and he was the one that was saying it's non-negotiable. You have to brace your spine. If your spine bends, you don't run as fast. You sacrifice limb speed, because in his model, he studies the weightlifting where the ball and socket joints of the hips are really what's doing the movement, whereas the core is braced solid to maintain that load on your back. So it was literally that, just those circumstances and events as they arranged themselves led to this propagation of, unstable surface training makes you weaker, because once you hear it and once you say it, well, now it's being said and heard everywhere within the industry in the circles, and no one wants to be ostracized as the odd man out, right? No one wants to take the risk. They've done scientific experimentation where they bring the test subject into a room with 5 others, and they say, which line is the longest? And, the test subject goes, that line's the longest. And everybody else says, no, the other one's the longest. And the guy's just like, what? And then you go through that like 4 or 5 rounds. What ends up happening is the pressure that he starts saying the same line as the other people. So he is now he's blinded to reality. So I don't even think he's ignoring reality. It's almost not his fault. And he is being blinded to reality by the social.
Well, I want to take this as a great example of how narratives can start to form, right? Because Eric Cressy took this study where there was one variable that he tested, which was lunges on an unstable surface with a group of, like you said, a group of 10 and a group of 9 people. And the primary findings were that over 10 weeks, that unstable surface training attenuated improvements in athletic performance, basically, in a nutshell. And that turned into Testosterone Nation, which I used to read religiously when I was a young lifter, like when I was a young kid trying to get jacked, that I would read T Nation relentlessly. And you have these well-to-do coaches and a circle and a certain community that if you take yourself seriously, you're going to follow a particular narrative. And if you go against it while everyone else is kind of making fun of it, it's schoolyard, bullying. And this is an example, Will, this was supposed to be a 30,000 foot view of what our upcoming series on science and inquiry into movement and biomechanics is going to cover. And I think we did cover a lot of ground today. The big takeaway is that there are narratives that form, that there are limitations to the way that scientific studies can kind of derive information from movement because it's operating from a particular paradigm. And I think we explored really well how some of these paradigms are formed and how they can get stuck in these mind traps of, well, this is the way it is because you have this data, and the data could actually be shit. It could be actually very piss poor, lacking, and irrelevant to the things that end up being extrapolated by down the line. Right. And David, this is the perfect example, the Bosu ball being shit on for years and misinterpreted and taken out of context because of one of Eric Cressy's studies. This is a perfect example of this happening. Now, when you're looking at complex movement realities, the variables that you actually have to test are so immense and have to be looked at from a different paradigm, which are not being looked at right now because a lot of the research is based on other extrapolations of current research. And if you're building your model based on a current model while not looking at the possibilities outside of your own model, you're not going to experience a progression of thought. So Will, as we're continuing on these series, what are some other things that people can kind of expect to learn from us? What are some of the topics that we're going to dive into on future episodes, just so that people get a sneak preview?
Well, we do have to figure this out. We do have to solve the problem, right? So we're going to dive into what I believe the problem is, and that's the underlying philosophy and the lack thereof. Currently, looking at how the science is formed and the thought processes that precede scientific rigor in the current age, right? So I've read a lot of Hume, a lot of Thomas Kuhn. There's a brilliant current philosopher named Rana Lil Arjen from Norway. I'm trying to get her on the show. She's on vacation right now, but she's a philosopher. I would suggest looking at her work. It is fantastic, and it is literally a layout of how to solve all this. Okay, and to make research-based science open up their doors a little bit, and to understand that you're looking at a human being, not just a number and not just a statistic. There is multiple variables here, and with RCTs currently, it goes single variable to single variable. Okay, and that's how to actually test. That's how to make it 100%. If you have the perfect data set and two variables and you can hypothetically test them, then that would be perfect. However, that's not ever how real life works, and that's not ever the person in front of you. So we need a more holistic, I know they hate that word, a more holistic view of how movement works. Currently, it's a very dualist approach. How I work as a chiro, somebody comes into me with pain, you fix pain. Okay, that's not all what I do, but that's the current approach for, you know, physios, anyone. You come in with a problem, and the person expects this too, the client, the patient, right? So it's very like, you have a problem with your part, I'm going to fix your part. Your pain gone, you leave, I'm paid, right? So let's switch that to, there's a human being in front of me, multiple variables, and let's have a human-to-human interaction, which is the art of it. And that is thrown out the window right now because art and science do not coincide because of all the things we talked about today.
Well, let me that I like that a lot, Will, because I think, and I said this to you guys, I don't know, whenever we met, that I think that this has the capacity to beat Town Square, and you know, I think that you're on the right approach with this, and I think there's one tangible thing that I think could really help, not burn it down, but you know, help bridge this whole process, and that is that SMU. Imagine how many athletes they put in that 3D motion capture, and then imagine that that's an application or a program that you can now view it from any vantage point you want. So think of the treasure trove of data that needs to be reanalyzed, because now let's say they did 100 runners, okay? And maybe you could categorize them as little old ladies, you know, weekend warriors and elite athletes. So you got 33 of each or whatever, right? You could literally go into that program and just set it up square ahead, count the number of steps, and then measure with a vertical line some, you know, area defined on the head to the area defined on the foot, and just get a measure of the different people and the ratio of precision to head over foot and not. And some people will be more in the middle. Some people will have one side and not the other side. And now you have a departure point where you're not coming to any conclusions so much as you're getting the true, what are human beings in our laboratory in this 3D motion? What are they doing? And we can analyze it from the front, where we have a complete, you know, different perspective that removes the optical illusion of stillness. When you look at it from the side, God's honest, it looks still. And it's incredible, the amount of movement. How can I not be perceiving that? Like, how can I not see that?
And the reason that they aren't is because, again, we're talking about when you're operating from a particular paradigm, you don't look for those particular variables,
you're
right?
Not
and
looking
so,
for it.
so I think people kind of get a good, I think this episode was good to get that 30,000 foot view of where we're coming from and why we want to investigate this. We see a limitation with a model of thinking and a model of investigating truth. And we want to try to derive a better way to get closer to the truth, because that's ultimately what we're aiming for in this podcast. How can we implement language from a new paradigm into an old narrative? How can we use very reliable methods of testing data to test new types of data and ask better questions? How can we use experience and the art side and the multivariable human element of movement to form better questions to test with the scientific method? That is, you know, for me, that's kind of what I'm hoping to explore in this series.
Absolutely.
And on that note, guys, we're going to wrap this episode up today. This was an awesome conversation. I think we got a lot of ground covered. I think we really did give everyone kind of a good baseline for where we're starting to kick this series off. I'm really excited to get into some more nuance and some more detail and more specific situations, but I'm very, very satisfied with this as a 30,000 foot view. Ladies and gentlemen, this was episode 69 of the Art of Move podcast. We are closing in on that 100 episodes really, really fast. It's kind of crazy. But thank you so much for listening, guys. If you're listening on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps the algorithm. It really helps our visibility. And I also just like to hear from you. What did you like? What did you dislike? What did you agree with, disagree with? In general, you're adding to the conversation too. This isn't just, you listening to us talk, and, it's not a one-sided conversation. We want to hear from you too, because that's how the perspectives expand. That's the whole point of this. Like you said, town square, right? If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, leave us a rating and review. That also really helps. You can follow me at The Body Moves on Instagram. Will is at The Art of Move. David is at the David Weck and at Weck Method, if you want to follow him. And thank you so much, guys, for having this conversation. We got really, really deep with it. And David, thanks for hopping in and giving your take and telling your story too. I think it really, really added value for the kind of perspectives that we were trying to share today.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right, guys, we'll catch you on the next episode.
Have a good one, guys.